Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about problems in World of Warcraft Classic, or are they problems? And that's really going to be the main discussion in this video. Lots of people submit tons of feedback about every version of World of Warcraft, right? A lot of it has to do with identifying problems or perceived problems with the game, and somebody has to be the arbiter, the person who decides, hey, is this actually a problem, or is this intended? Maybe this is even not. Maybe it's even a good thing that this exists, right? And we're going to be the arbiters today. We're going to take that role, and I think it should be really fun. We got a bunch of quote unquote problems here that I think in most cases, a lot of these aren't actually problems, or they're not really problems that you can have good solutions to. So you just kind of have to do the normal band-aid solutions. But we'll take a look and we'll see what you guys think as well. And I want to be completely transparent here. We're borrowing this list from Dave on Dev. Now, Dave on Dev is a content creator who is a game developer. I believe he has, it says in his bio, 18 years of experience developing games. And more recently, he started talking about Classic Plus and kind of doing a bunch of exercises and workshops with the viewers on his channel, kind of discussing how he would go about, tackling something like Classic Plus, right? And how developers do in general. He's kind of giving insight into the community on how game developers kind of work out tackling these projects. And he's also kind of involving the community. And that's basically what this list came from. It's a workshop that he's trying to do. And the idea is that he is having the community list a bunch of problems. He consolidated them into a list based off the feedback that he got in prior videos. And now he wants the people on his channel that are watching this video to pick like the top 5 problems out of these. And I think that the idea is that he's talking about this is how the devs would deal with this. This is like their methodology, right? Because they get so much feedback. Some of it's really great feedback. Some of it not so much, right? Because you have to remember that even a system that seems like it's amazing on paper, right? And this is like the best thing ever. Wow, it's incredible that we developed the system. Somebody is going to have a problem with it, right? Because it's likely not going to benefit everyone at every given time. People get frustrated, right, whenever something's not benefiting them, and they'll complain about it, right? And sometimes the complaint is not really meant to be all that serious and half-hearted, but other times, people really do maybe have a little bit of a warped perspective on things, expecting everything to work for them all the time. And as a developer, you have to kind of go through and sift through all this feedback and figure out what is a real problem, what is a non-problem, what actually isn't a problem at all. Might this actually be helping the game? This thing that people think is actually a problem, right? So yeah, I think this will be really interesting, and I'll link Dave's stuff down below. And yeah, he just seems like a really cool guy, and I definitely recommend you check out his channel. I haven't looked at everything on his channel yet. I'm still kind of catching up because I just came across him a little bit more recently. But yeah, I've been loving his stuff so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through this list, and I'm going to talk about kind of what... Well, I'm just going to give my opinion on if I think this thing is a problem or not, right? And basically why. And I want you to keep in mind as I'm doing this, this isn't like Dave's list, it's a list he's compiled, right? So he's not saying that all these things are problems. He's taking notes from the community, compiling it, and then now he wants the community to pick 1 to 5 what are the most pressing problems from this list. But in his video, if you watch it, you'll notice that he goes through some of these. He doesn't go through all of them, but he goes through some of them. And based on his kind of tone, I think you can kind of gather that he doesn't really view all of these as problems either, So something to keep in mind, like he's not saying that all these are issues. Just what the feedback that he's gotten from the community. So we'll start by just naming the problem, and then I'll give you a little bit of context that's provided here, and then I'll talk about what I think about it. And at the end of the video, I'll give you my top 5 problems that I think need to be addressed in Classic Plus in the order, right? So the first one here is content invalidation. So new content replacing old content. Now, this is a super common talking point, especially when it comes to Classic Plus. I think like probably like 6 months ago was like the peak for this. Everything everything is about trends nowadays, right? And it's not even like an intentional thing. It's just somebody will start something. Somebody else will look at that and be like, oh, hey, that's a reasonable idea. They'll make a video about it, and that's kind of how the trends start. And it was pretty trendy about 6 months ago to talk heavily about horizontal progression. And it was mentioned before that. It's still mentioned now, but I think it really peaked around then. And everybody was kind of just glazing up RuneScape, OSRS, like the old version of RuneScape, and just saying how RuneScape, like the best MMO to ever exist, like it solves all these problems and it's evergreen, and you don't have to worry about any content invalidation, which is not actually true because RuneScape is constantly dealing with having to worry about content validation in one form or the other. And I want to highlight that before we kind of go a little bit deeper into this because people think that a game having horizontal progression is sort of like a panacea against content invalidation. That is not necessarily the case. It obviously helps for obvious reasons, right? But even RuneScape, they have to be very deliberate with a lot of their decisions and kind of think about what they want to do. For example, they're having some issues right now where some of the older raids have items that just aren't really kind of up to snuff anymore. And again, RuneScape is not the same as WoW in any way. So it's not like the items in the older raids aren't up to snuff because they just are losing the eye level battle, right? They're not up to snuff because they've just kind of been power crept in less obvious ways, actually. So when people think of power creep, again, they also think of like, oh, just strict eye level progression. Obviously, that's not the only way things can be power crept. And my point is just that even in a game that has horizontal progression, they're still kind of dealing with some of these problems, this content invalidation problem, these power creep problems. People think that those games inherently, by the way they're designed, solve those issues. And no, you still have to, be very intentional with how you go about adding things into the game, right? So I'll say that before we even kind of get into anything. But what are my thoughts on content invalidation, right? Well, I personally think that the vast majority of players that play World of Warcraft, they wouldn't like a horizontal progression system in WoW. The game has pretty much always been built on vertical progression. Now you can turn the game into horizontal progression. Obviously, there's nothing that's preventing you from doing that, but it would just be a drastic rework of the game. And I'm just imagining, somebody is in like the raid after Nax in Classic Plus or something like that, right? They get their Might of Menethil, and they can't wait to get into the new raid. They want to get the next two-handed axe, two-handed mace, or whatever it is, because they want to hit people that much harder when they go out into the world or battlegrounds or something like that, right? And they slay the last boss. They're super excited, and it's a pirate boss or something, and the weapon drops, and it looks so cool. It's like a two-handed sword, and it's like the Pirate Slayer 9000, right? And then you look at the text, and you see that it gives you like 500 attack power versus pirates, and it basically has like less top end than your Might of Menethil. And you're just looking there, you're sitting there, and you get the surprise Pikachu face on, and you're just like, wow, I spent hours of my life progressing through this instance. I farmed all these consumables, we wiped all this time, and what do I have to show for it? I have the Pirate Slayer 9000, which is, basically, I guess it's BIS in this raid, or maybe it's not even BIS, because maybe two-hand isn't even the meta spec or something like that. But you guys get what I mean, right? And I think that's like the most common way I've heard that they would make this game. And that's kind of sort of what RuneScape does, right? The whole idea is that things are more specialized. They have specialized uses. And I just really don't think that the classic community wants this at all. I think that they want to take their new shiny toy that they got out of the raid, bring it into a battleground, smack some people in the face, or bring it into the open world on a PvP server, smack some people in the face, right? They want their new staff to make their dots do crazy damage. They just don't want to have stuff limited to a certain subset of the game, right? The whole world is called World of Warcraft. It's supposed to be this big, expansive world, right? So when they get their new two-handed sword or their bow or whatever, they don't want to only be able to use it in, one or two areas. They want to be able to use it in the entire game, which I think is understandable, and that's sort of the expectation that has been built over the years, right? So yeah, I just really don't see them kind of going away from that anytime soon, and I think it would cause a lot of disgruntlement within the player base, right? And you have to be a little bit careful because the people that are talking online about wanting things like horizontal progression, um, you never know what a percentage of the actual overall player base that is, right? And then on top of that, you're also never sure if they truly understand what it means to have classic progression, right? Because, or horizontal progression, because everybody in their mind will probably think at one point or another, like, hey, it'd be cool if things weren't invalidated as quickly in this version of the game, right? That's a pretty reasonable thought to have. Like, it's something that you would want to have happen, right? And the problem is though is like when you think about the mechanisms that allow you to prevent that from happening, you don't really have a lot of good choices, right? You kind of have to just make the items that come after less powerful. And again, people aren't looking for that, right? That's short-circuiting the fun for a lot of people. And I just think this is one that is kind of a non-problem, right? um, it will eventually become a problem. Don't get me wrong, right? If we're kind of like 8 or 9 raids deep and, Molten Core is still in the game in its base form, that is sort of a problem. Uh, but it's really up to the devs to find a way to kind of integrate that, right? Maybe they sunset it or something like that, and you can kind of just do it for transmog, or maybe they add like pets to it or something like that, some type of cosmetic reward. Maybe you just change some of the gear in there and stuff like that. But ultimately, this is not a problem that really can be solved. And it'll be interesting to see how they attempt to solve it going forward because personally, I think we're still going to get expansions for whatever this game is, this new Classic Plus game. I don't think it's going to be a thing where, we just keep getting patch on patch on patch that aren't expansions. I think even if they don't sell you like the Burning Crusade 2.0 or something like that, effectively, we're going to get more content updates for this. And it's going to act like an expansion, whether players like it or not. So I don't think we're avoiding the vertical progression. Um, yeah, I just don't see it. So power creep, it's basically the same thing, right? Bars a lot of the same problems as content invalidation, but again, you kind of need power creep. That's the whole point of a vertical progression game, right? If you're not going to have power creep in a vertical progression game, then what is the point? Like, there's nothing for players to chase, right? People want to do the new raid content because it gives better gear, right? Obviously, raid content is fun in and of itself, but you have to keep in mind that with the way the structure of this MMO works, right? Typically, you're going to have to invest something to go in and do the raid, not even just necessarily your time, potentially time outside the raid, farming consumables and stuff like that. So there needs to be some type of reward that players want to get, are seeking, won't get right away, right? And it's probably going to be a reward, like I was saying before, they want to leverage in multiple areas, battlegrounds, the open world, everything like that. So again, is power creep a problem? Sure, it is a problem to some degree, right? But that it's just going to have to be something that's going to be solved over time by the devs, kind of doing little band-aid fixes. I think just to give you a great example of how you can kind of fix power creep, right? Think about Wrath of the Lich King. I know everybody's going to be like, oh my god, he's bringing up Wrath of the Lich King in the Classic Plus video. But think about when Ice Crown came out, right? And they added the new 5-mans. What was the point of that, right? It's because the gear that was in the old 5-mans, it just wasn't cutting it anymore for new players, right? If you want new players to come into the game, you don't want them to have to go through the entire progression chain because at some point, people are going to just, not want to go through all of those raids, right? If you have like 11 raids that are out in the end game, people are not going to want to go through 1 to 11. That's just like the reality right now. Don't get me wrong. I love the idea of making things, last a bit longer, giving you kind of, chase items that are still in old raids and stuff like that to make people go back and do them. And that gives an incentive for people to run raids with newer players, right? Or run raids with alts and stuff like that. That's all great. But at some point, you were going to run into the wall of like, wow, there's like 10 other raids that are out, and Molten Core just really isn't cutting it anymore, right? And you have to be able to let go at some point, whether that be you're transitioning to a new expansion, or they sunset the raid, or they just redo the loot in the raid or something like that, and maybe repurpose the raid itself, they update it or something. But that's the only way that you can really deal with these problems in a vertically progressed game. So yeah, those are just things I don't really see as problems. They're kind of like always little gnawing problems in the background that you are just going to have to eventually find solutions for, but they shouldn't be like a primary focus in your brain, and they especially shouldn't be a primary focus right off the bat, right? Because these are things that are really going to start to become problems later. I mean, if you have a really good release schedule for this Classic Plus game, you can be on raid probably 4 or 5, 2 years in, potentially. So you're not even that deep into the raid pipeline at that point, right? So you have more time to develop ideas and solutions about how you're exactly going to deal with this stuff while you're also making new content, right? The third one, raid logging, nothing to do between raid nights. So this is something that I don't think it's an actual problem in World of Warcraft. It could be a problem in other games, right? But in WoW, it's not really a problem. What do I mean by that? Well, in principle, you do have stuff to do in between raids, right? Because you need to farm consumables to go into raids. And this is why it's important, in my opinion, that raids, don't just provide you with all the golds and all the consumables. This is another reason why kind of GDKP is a problem, right? Like what GDKP essentially does is it allows like whales to just buy a massive amount of gold from G2G, right? And this gold shouldn't really be in the economy because a bunch of bots are farming it, and it's all centered on the bots, right? Like they're all compiling it together and then they're selling it to other players in mass quantities. Those players are then doling it out to the community, right? And what's happening is you're going to a GDKP run, you're getting, I don't know, like let's say you're getting like anywhere from like 2 to like 5k gold or something like that. Now you don't really have to do anything for the rest of your week. You can buy all the consumes you need and just sit back and wait for next run, right? That's not how it's intended to happen. If you want the world to be populated, right, you need to have there be an incentive for people to go out into the world, and there is an incentive for people to go out into the World of Warcraft, right? To farm items like the Felcloth I'm farming here, to farm herbs, to farm mining nodes, to farm other items like the sandcrawler meat I was farming. That's the whole point in having all these professions and all these things that kind of give buffs. Is you go out into the world, people spread themselves out doing different activities. I'm collecting the sandworm meat, somebody else is collecting the herbs, somebody else is collecting the Felcloth. We're all trading these things for the shared currency of gold, right? Which is allowing us to purchase from other people what we don't have. And that's kind of entertaining us and keeping us busy during the interim between raids, right? And then you can add other things as well, like PvP. Some people just love to play the game for PvP, right? And then there's other people that maybe are going to hunt transmog. This is why I actually think that having things like transmog in the game is actually quite good, right? Because ideally you want more reasons for people to be in the world outside of even just the farming, right? And the more reasons you have for people to be in the world outside of farming, it actually makes the farming sort of better as well, because it actually takes some of the competition out of the farming, right? And there's kind of like an opportunity cost there. It's like, do I want to go farm transmog, right, to make my character look cooler, or do I want to actually gain gold so I can buy more consumes for raid and stuff like that, right? And that's a decision you actually have to make when it's a little bit difficult to kind of get these items outside the raid, and you can't just trivialize everything by either buying it all with money you get from a GDKP, or just have it be like it takes 10 minutes to farm all your supplies for the entire week, right? Like both of those are sort of bad, and the more stuff we can add to kind of get people out in the world and get people doing activities, get people grouping up, getting people into old dungeons and stuff like that, the better, right? So is raid logging a problem? It would be a problem if there was nothing in the game to do, but there are things in the game to do. It's just the players are finding ways to bypass it, essentially via buying gold in a lot of cases, even if they're not technically buying gold. Like that's the argument you hear all the time, right? It's like, oh, I didn't buy gold, I just went to a GDKP. Well, it's like, yeah, you're not getting banned for doing that, or at least you wouldn't before, but you are circumventing the entire system, and this is why there's so much raid logging, right? Because you don't actually have to do anything outside of the game. So I think the biggest thing you can do is like clamp down on RMT, clamp down on GDKP, and this is gonna force people to be in the world more. Also, making alts, in my opinion, much more like friendly, having the game be alt friendly, having the time to hit level 60 be lower. This is going to populate the world more than anything else. And I was actually just having this discussion on my previous video with somebody in the comments where they were talking about, no, you can't have classic, it has to have the same like time length to hit 60. You can't have it be shorter. Everybody wants that. They want the super long grind. And it's like, well, no, but they obviously don't want the super long grind. It's so obvious because whenever you give people the option to boost, whether it be through Blizzard Store or whether it be through, somebody mage boosting somebody in the world, how many players take that opportunity? Tons of them, right? You rarely see people leveling. That was a thing in 2019. It was a thing in every other version where boosts were allowed. And then in the Burning Crusade, where you can buy boosts and stuff like that, you see less people leveling as well. And that's a direct consequence of the fact that it takes a long time to go from 1 to 60 or whatever. I would kind of be in favor of the argument where if you want to have the first go through, be kind of a bit of a slog or whatever, you want to have that, that classic push to level 60, maybe you could do that. But then for alts, you should definitely ease the XP. And I don't like the idea of stuff like heirloom items because I think that they cannibalize a lot of the game's early game economy, which is already struggling to begin with, right? You want new players to be able to sell stuff on the auction house to other players and stuff like that. But I think like just making the game a little bit quicker to get through, I think that'll help a lot in getting more people out into the world and preventing raid logging. Because what are you going to do if your main is saved for the week or something like that? You can make an alt, right? And having fun classes obviously really plays into that as well. So the more classes you have that are actually viable and can do raids, it gives players more choice onto what they actually want to try out. And yeah, all these things kind of synergize together to help problems, right? So yeah, I don't really think raid logging is a problem in principle. It's just become a problem due to like the RMT and GDKP and stuff like that, right? So endgame compression. The world shrinks to the new tier. I mean, this is... I don't think it's really that big of a problem either, to be honest. I think that the main retail has almost made this more of a problem than it is in classic, right? Where if you add too many things with a new patch to support that patch, for example, like if every time you release a new raid, right, you release kind of like a new zone or something like that, where you can go into that zone and farm stuff for the raid or farm like new consumables and stuff like that you can't get other places. Well, then obviously what you're kind of doing is you're shrinking the world, right? But if you keep things kind of general, like they are in WoW Classic, then you don't run into the problem as much. So like think about it in WoW Classic, right? If you want Flask the Titans for the new raid, then that means that you have to go to Silithus and farm Black Lotus, or you have to go to one of the other 3 zones, right? Those are the only zones that the Black Lotus spawns. If you want to get the Grom's Blood, you have to go to Fellwood or Blasted Lands or something like that. There are specific zones where things spawn, and that is just where they spawn, right? And you can't get them from other places. This is why I actually think too that it's bad to have these things be available in dungeons, like things like herbs and mining nodes and stuff like that, because it takes away from, again, people being out in the world, because you want them to be out in the world. You want them to have to visit certain zones. And to kind of further protect against this endgame compression problem, I think that what you should do is you should make some of the rare resources available in more spots, but maybe shrink the quantity. For example, I'm not super opposed to even having something like a rich thorium vein in Element Forest, right? I think it's actually kind of cool. Neural did this a lot, and it was a super interesting idea where it was like outside of Windward or something like that. If you go into the fields, there's this random huge rock of red orichalcum just sitting in the middle of the field, and it looks kind of weird, but it's actually cool as hell. And like as a player, I remember the first time in the game, I was like, wow, that's cool. I was like, that's like the end game ore, right? I was like, I want to get level 200 mining so I can come back and mine this, right? And it's funny because in the end game of that game, right, the high level zones obviously had the highest concentration of the end game mats, which is generally speaking how it should be, right? However, because they had these end game mats also strewn about in some of the normal zones, like the earlier zones and stuff like that, um, you could actually make routes. And so it wasn't just that rock. There were also, that was like the big pile of orichalcum, but there were other deposits of orichalcum that were kind of spread out throughout some of the other starter zones. And you could actually make a route where you go through and you pick up these kind of oddball spawns. And a lot of people would look at this and they'd be like, well, what's the point? Like, because it's going to be inefficient to gather it that way. Like, nobody's going to be farming out there. But that's actually the whole thing is when the endgame zones get populated, right, which they inevitably will, because people are trying to, farm the highest tier resources in the most efficient way possible. They're going to be out there looking for resources. And this gives players another way that they can adapt and they can make a route that maybe the route is less efficient on paper, right? But if it's uncontested, now all of a sudden, you're actually making use of those cool little things that you added in the starter zone. So I think that you should actually be adding more kind of end game resources to some of the earlier zones and just kind of see how that plays out. I think it could actually be really, really fun, right? And then you kind of give players a reason to kind of go back. And it could be fun because, like, let's say you're farming like a rich thorium vein in something like a level 30 zone, or it has like a reasonable concentration, right? Again, it's not the best concentration, but it's a reasonable concentration. So you're there, you're maybe farming something else and some rich thorium. Maybe there's like a low level herb that's kind of, still worth something. So you've kind of made your own route now, right? Where you're farming this low level herb, you're farming the rich thorium, and then you run into like a level 35 who needs help with a quest, right? And you're like right there. All you have to do is invite him, and you can slay the mob for him and stuff like that. And so it encourages cooperation, it encourages friend making and stuff like that. It's kind of cool for the low level players to see the high level players running around their zone. Gives them kind of something to aspire to, right? So I think that's how you would kind of solve problems with the endgame compression. But I don't think that the endgame is super compressed as it is. So this would be more like a little tweaks, right? And you wouldn't really, I don't think it's a huge problem, even as it is now. Progress isn't durable. Can't take a break or you're behind. So I don't, again, this is something that I think is, it's very like wishful thinking, right? Where you, the whole idea of these games, guys, is that they're persistent worlds, right? And that means that everything is going on while you are logged off, right? Now that's really cool. That's super cool, right? It was a really novel idea back when it happened. The obvious downside is that when you're not on the game, whenever you're not in the game, you are falling behind in some degree, right? And if you're going to play MMOs, you just have to be able to accept that. Like there's really no other way to put it, right? If this is something that's going to be keeping you up all night, right? Like, whenever I take a break or if I can't play as much this week or something like that, then you're not going to have fun. This is going to be something that just eats at you constantly, and you need to find a way to just reframe this in your mind and kind of not let it bother you. I don't know what else to say because there's no solution to this problem really, right? I think there are some things that are quite bad. I think that some of the worst offenders in terms of progress isn't durable aren't even what people are thinking of right here, right? Like, to me, stockpiling a bunch of gold from playing all the time versus somebody who isn't, that's like the least of somebody's worries, right? And I think that WoW Classic, and if they keep this model going forward, it'll be the same thing, Classic Plus, it actually does a really good job of making sure that stuff like gold, like the stuff that you can acquire, by just playing the game nonstop and you can keep building up and building up and building up, there's kind of limits to what that'll help. For example, I have 221 dark runes on this character, right? Farming more of them is not making me more powerful because I can't even spend these, right? Obviously, that's not the point of this farm. I'm doing it for fell cloth and other things. But as long as you have a point where, at a certain amount of gold, you can no longer leverage an advantage, then things are going to be pretty much okay, right? And that basically becomes, can you afford all your consumables for the week? If you can, then somebody else having like, 5 or 10k more gold than you isn't really going to matter unless they put something like GDKP in the game, right? So again, GDKP is that's another problem with GDKP, which I'll probably even make a separate video about that. But it really does favor people who can play all the time, even in a system where gold buying doesn't exist, right? Because the person who's online and is able to farm nonstop, they get the benefit in a GDKP world where there's no RMT, right? They can kind of dominate the entire scene. And WoW actually does a really good job of adding these barriers into the game. Things like the bind on pickup loot, right? The fact that you're locked out of a raid once you do it like once a week or something like that, right? So there's inherent restrictions to bring everybody back to the same sort of power level already, right? But you can't have it where, like, if you skip an entire raid tier, then yes, you're going to be somewhat behind, right? And honestly, in Classic, you're not even really that behind. Like, if you did Blackwing Lair and you skip AQ, you can go into Nax. If you did Molten Core and you skip Blackwing Lair, you can probably go into AQ, especially if you do some 20-man content to fill in some slots. So it's really not anywhere near as big of a problem as people think. This whole progression isn't durable thing, it's just something that people say, and they're personally frustrated that they feel like they're left behind, but it's not really a thing at the end of the day, right? Itemization itemization becomes solved, right? So this is one that I actually think is hilarious, and to be honest, we might end the video here, and we might just do another video because this one's already getting quite long, and we're not even like I don't even think we're halfway through this list yet. But we'll probably do a couple of these maybe. But yeah, itemization becomes solved, right? So the funny part about this is that this is something, it's almost like a misnomer. A lot of people think this happens in all sorts of games, but in my opinion, in most cases, it actually really doesn't. People are so bad at solving games, and we actually laugh about this all the time. In this guild I'm in right now, Full Send, because we play on the hardcore Doomhowl server, right? So if we make a mistake and we die, we lose our characters. And the reason why we laugh about it is because there's so much misinformation, both in terms of itemization, how to play the game, how certain things interact. There's so much misinformation out there, even in like a 15, 20-year-old game, right? And people say all the time, oh, the game's solved, the game is figured out. Lots of people who play, even in this guild, who know a lot, right? Because keep in mind, a bunch of the players in this guild, like we've killed KT Deathless, right? So people know what's going on to some degree. But even we learn stuff about the game like all the time, or another class or something like that. So this idea that everything is going to become solved like super fast, it's just not true. Like, metas are going to develop. Metas will always develop, but meta does not mean that meta is the only thing a meta is it's what players think is best, right? That doesn't mean that it is what is truly best in every scenario. That a lot of times what actually is best and what people think is best, there can be a deviation between those two. This happens in all sorts of games. League itemization is probably my favorite example of this. The pro players in League, the people that get paid, in some cases, millions of dollars, at least hundreds of thousands of dollars to play the game for a living, these people suck at itemization. They're actually so bad. And if you talk to the average person, they'll never believe you. They'll just be like, oh, you're like an idiot for saying that, right? Because this guy gets paid, he's getting paid $200,000. Of course he's building the right item or something like that. But it's just not true. If you actually know what you're talking about, and you go in and you look and you understand, like, what is this player's function in this game on this champion? What do they have to do? And then why are they building these items? In a lot of cases, you realize that pros are super bad at building items, right? They're super bad at doing these optimization type things. Now, I will say that in a game like League, it's a little bit less optimization centric, I feel like, than a game like WoW. Like, a lot of people go into League and the thing that's on the forefront of their mind is basically, using their mechanical skill to brute force smack somebody else down into the dirt on the game, right? And that's kind of like the lens that they view the game through. So obviously, when you have players with this mindset, there's going to be less of a focus on things like optimizing your items and optimizing your builds and your runes and stuff like that. But even in a game like WoW, that is more focused on optimization, there's oftentimes quite a gap between what people think is good and what is actually good. If you actually listen to Limit Max, he talks about this a lot, where he'll talk about the class theory crafters in retail, where whenever something new comes out, like a new patch or whatever, the theory crafters will kind of get right at it, right? And they'll be like, oh, this is the most optimal DPS. This is the best tank build or tank gear, tank stats you can have for this raid. And Max was saying, for the DPS, in a lot of cases, it does tend to be a little bit more figured out, right? Because the goal is kind of just doing damage. It's a very straightforward goal. But when you have something like healers or tanks, and the problems you're trying to solve are a little bit more abstract, people are absolutely awful at figuring out like what people should be wearing. Even in hardcore, I feel like people make terrible gearing decisions. I was just talking to somebody the other day in my guild, actually, and he's talking about, oh, do I want to have 1 agility or 9 stamina on my bracers? And this guy is like, yeah, I'm going 1 agility. I don't need the extra 9 stamina. This is on hardcore, by the way. This guy is a survivor of the dam. He's killed KT multiple times, right? Like many times. And it just makes absolutely no sense, right? So people are terrible at optimization, even using machines and stuff like that, right? Because an AI can only do so much for you, right? It can tell you, like, on paper what is the best thing. But if you can't create a scenario via the AI that matches what is going on in the game, right? If you can't create a simulation that matches what's going on in the game, then you always have to be able to use your reasoning ability and kind of like your contextual skills and pick apart, like, oh, like, yeah, on paper, this does more damage here, but, I just don't really actually end up getting that much use out of it, or I feel like this isn't really working for me here, so I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try a new talent. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. And it's a combination, right, between that kind of mathematical throughput theory crafting and practical in-game experience. You really have to marry the two. And a lot of people just don't do that, right? And, oftentimes there can be some debate even about what is better, right? And things are very contextual. It depends on the circumstances. So this idea that, itemization gets solved, I think it's very rarely true unless we're talking about pure item level, right? So in other words, like, this item is just like way more stats than the other item, and therefore it's better. Classic doesn't really operate on that, though, right? So again, I don't think this is a big problem for Classic, because in a lot of cases, even if an item has a higher item level, the budget of the item can be different, right? So you can have an item that has a lower item level, and maybe it just has all damage stats, no stamina, right? That's the cool thing about a game like Classic, and that item can kind of be on par with an item that has a higher item level, and some of its budget is actually allocated to something like stamina, right? So, yeah, I don't think Classic suffers from this problem to a huge degree. I mean, obviously, we want to avoid that, right? We want to make things less about item level is king and stuff like that. I think that's a big problem that retail tends to have, where it's like, oh, yeah, it doesn't matter what staff you get or what one hand you get or whatever. Just get an item level X one, right? Or get one, send your crests on this, or, make, as long as it can upgrade to this, it's fine, or something like that, right? So retail has more of that problem. Not really as much of a thing in WoW Classic. So, yeah, I think, like I said, I think how many more things are there? There's there's a lot more of these. So we're going to pause here, and we're going to do a part 2 to this video, because I think we are like about 40 minutes in, right? So yeah, thanks so much for watching. Leave your comments down below if you disagree with me on any of these points, and we're going to make a part 2 to this video. So be on the lookout for that, because yeah, there's just way too much stuff here to try and go over all at once. So thank you guys for watching, and hope to hear your feedback in the comment section. See you next time.